Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. It's the podcast with you in mind. I'm your host, Tony Roy. Hope you're having a great week. This week, we're going into the archives and pulling a really good episode that we did actually early on in our podcast history, but it's one that merits repeating and listening to. It'll really change how you view what it means to be successful and what's important for you to build the pickleball game that you want for yourself and for your pickleball improvement. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Last week's podcast, we talked a little bit about improvement. We gave you some 3 tips to improve, different things you can do. What I want to talk about in this week's podcast is I want to focus on what you need to do to improve, not from a sense of tips or specific things you can do, but conceptually, what does it mean to be a successful pickleball player? And by successful, I don't mean it in the sense of someone who, I don't mean it in the kind of loose sense of, well, I enjoy playing pickleball, so I'm successful, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to go out and just get some exercise and see some friends, socialize, that's perfectly fine, perfectly good use of pickleball. But if you want to improve as a player, so if you want to be a successful pickleball player in that sense, in the sense of results, then the question is, what do you need to focus on, or what should you focus on in order to achieve that objective? So, say that, right now you're playing at a 3-0, 3-5, even 4, whatever level you're playing at, right? Or you're just, you're playing in a group of people and you feel that when you leave the courts, every time that maybe you're not one of the stronger players on the court in terms of results of that day, and so you want to improve that. The question is, well, what do I do to go from where I'm at to where I want to be? And the truth about it is that it's not the exciting things that will make you a better pickleball player. You don't need something like, I was thinking about it, like how to explain it. So, you don't need to add like a double reverse topspin lob with a pike finish to be a good pickleball player. So you don't need some fancy new shot, some yet undiscovered angle that you can generate and things like that. What you need to do to become a good pickleball player is to stick to the basics. Basics are the same as fundamentals. It's just the stuff that you need to do repeatedly and consistently well. A lot of times when you look at if you were to video one of your matches and watch it, which I highly recommend everybody do, it's one of the really only ways to see what's going on, is what you'll notice when you watch it later is that most of the rallies that you lost were probably the result of some small error that you committed, something like a misreturn of serve, not getting up to the MBZ, things that are very fixable, very very remediable, if you will, by players. No matter your skill level, there are things that you can do to improve those types of things and to improve your results as a pickleball player. Think back on the last few times you've been out on the court. How many of those games have you won based on some fancy shot? So yeah, it's exciting when you hit an ATP or someone does an Ernie or whatever, some weird serve that wins that rally. But really, how many games are won that way? How many games did you leave the court and said to yourself, I really won that game because I was able to do the fancy, again, the double reverse topspin lob shot? Probably not many, but you can definitely come off the court and say, okay, I probably could have done better that game if I had not missed a return of serve, or if I had made sure I got to the MBZ, if I had followed my lob in, if it was a good lob, I had followed it forward, if I had come forward on a nice third shot, if I had tried to neutralize the advantage of the return team when I'm on the serve team, if I had really understood the role of a serve team versus a return team and vice versa, and things like that. So when you come off the court, a lot of times the end result of a game is dictated not by the exciting, shot that everybody goes nuts about. It's dictated by the boring stuff. Who just played a better return side, who hit better returns of serve and things like that. So if you really want to improve as a pickleball player, or if you want to improve your results as a pickleball player, then what you really have to focus on is you have to focus on the fundamentals and the basics. If you listen into pickle, you've heard me use the term red herrings before, and that's really just a term to describe items or things that are fancy or shiny, that look like something I want to go after, and it'll improve my pickleball, which really isn't going to really help the game. Really not going to help the fundamentals, particularly if you're lacking in other areas. So let's say, for example, you're hitting 100 mile an hour returns of serve, but not making it up to the MBZ line. Then that's really not a good strategy to play with. You're better off hitting 20 mile an hour returns of serve that are high and deep and getting up to the MBZ line. Whenever I'm watching rec play, I'll notice players who have fundamentally sound games and players who do not. And my money will always be on the fundamentally sound player to take that game or to win that game. The player that's doing the exciting things and hitting hard balls and things like that, sometimes they'll win, sometimes they won't. But my money is generally going to be on the player that's just playing a fundamentally sound pickleball game, hitting nice deep returns. When they're on the return side, getting up to the MBZ, locking it down, denying the other team the opportunity to come forward, letting out balls go. And then on the serve side, trying to neutralize the advantage of the return team, get up to the MBZ line if you can, nice, calm fashion. And then once you're up there, try and play the best rally you can and try and win it. There's a Disney movie, and I can't remember if it's Up or one of those, but it's a movie with a dog that does the squirrel thing, that thing where they say squirrel and the dog just looks over to this, forgets whatever's happening and looks over to the squirrel. And I find that in pickleball sometimes as players will get distracted from following our path, if you will, to becoming a better player, which is we'll take our eye off the ball in terms of forgetting about the fundamentals, and we'll go chase after something like hard rip serve or cool spins all over the place or things like that. Trying to add too much variety to our game as opposed to really locking down the fundamentals. And once you've locked them down, then adding other fancier things to your game. Probably the best way to think about it is to think about it in terms of incremental improvement. So basically, you're going to add on as appropriate. So, until you have the basics locked down, it really doesn't make sense to add another thing on top of it. I use the example sometimes, or the graphic sometimes of you're building like a really, really nice house on sand. So, you take a sand foundation and then you start building this awesome structure on top of it. The sand foundation or the sand bottom will eventually give out, and the structure simply is not sustainable. So, you're better off starting off with a really nice foundation. Kind of think of it like building a pyramid. So you have your real wide first foundation, real solid first foundation, which is just basic fundamental play. And then you add a little bit on top of that, a little bit on top of that. And eventually maybe you make it to where you're doing ATPs and, again, fancier shots and spinning the ball and whatever. But if you don't have that good, solid foundation, then the rest really is not going to give you the results that you're hoping for. The moral of the story in this podcast is keep your eye on the fundamentals. You have to have an understanding of where you're at in the game in terms of your personal development. This is, pickleball is a very personal sport to everybody in terms of, where you're at versus where I'm at versus where, John or Mary or whomever are at. And so, you really want to, figure out kind of where you're at and what you need to be working on to improve your game, and then stick to the fundamentals. Once you've gotten that fundamental layer down and you're solid with it and you're good with it, then you can start adding on top of it and keep on building your game to get to where you want to get to. If you want to find out what the 80-10-10 rule is, stay tuned for the riff. So the 80-10-10 rule really stems from, I guess it's basic human nature. It's kind of a reminder to us. And, when we all started out as pickleball players, with very few exceptions, unless your name is Ben Johns or Simone or Jardim or somebody like that, when most of us or all of us, when we started pickleball, other than those folks, we were awful pickleball players. I mean, we may have been athletic, we may have been good tennis players or racquetball players or whatever, but we were not good pickleball players. And so, it takes some time to learn the game. You go out there and sometimes you get to play with players that are not at your level, players that are at your level, players that are above your level. And over time, you kind of matriculate through the game. You kind of make your own path in the game and really understand, how to play better pickleball. But what ends up happening a lot of times is when players improve. So players now, say when you started, you were a 3-0 or 3-5, and now you're a 4-0. And so there's kind of a concept of, well, I'm not going to play with a 3-5 anymore because now I'm a 4-0. So now I'm going to play 4-0s and 4-5s. And, there's a logical flaw in that approach because, if your objective is to play with, say you're a 4-0 and you want to play with 4-5s, if you apply the logic that you're not going to play with 3-5s, then why would the 4-5 ever play with you? So there's a logical flaw in that analysis of, well, I only play with my level or higher. Because if that's the case, then obviously the higher players would never play with you because they're only playing with their level or higher, and you just keep on going, and the whole system breaks down if you do that. And you also have to remember that the way that you were able to improve was because, when you were a 3-5 or a 3-0, a 3-5 or a 4-0 was willing to get on the court with you and play with you. So the 80-10-10 rule from Jesse, I think, is just kind of a nice way of formulating it, which is the 80-10-10 rule is basically 80% of the time you try and play games, around your level, right at your level. 10% of the time you try and play with players above your level, and 10% of the time you play with players who are underneath your level. So basically, it's a really good concept. You can do more than that. You can do 60, 20, 20, whatever you can do. But just the bottom line of it is, don't forget kind of where you came from when you were starting pickleball, and don't basically turn your back on those that are still learning or those that are coming in behind you to learn the game. Because if your concept is to do that, then there's really no reason why you should expect those that are in front of you to turn around and be willing to play with you. So 80-10-10 rule. Thank you, Jesse Simon, for sharing that. I think it's a really good way of looking at it, and try and keep that in mind when you're out there playing pickleball. Hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. If you have a minute to rate and review the podcast, it really helps out the podcast reaching other players. And as always, if you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends. Remember, if you enjoyed it, they probably will too. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.